Dan, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So Roku, my guess is you guys have been on somewhat of an upswing lately with everything that we're seeing, and with people being in the home more and all that sort of thing. But maybe I'll start there. Correct me if I'm wrong. How have things looked through this crazy year we've had?
The shift to streaming has absolutely accelerated in the last year, and it speaks to the broader streaming decade that we're in right now. Just as context, Roku is America's #1 TV streaming platform, and our mission is to connect consumers and advertisers and content owners together in a world where all TV and all TV ads will be streamed. We started more than a decade ago by creating players that plug into your TV and allow you to stream movies and television over the internet instead of over cable or over antenna. We expanded that over the years to create sticks that plug into your TV. And then we actually started licensing our operating system out to smart TV manufacturers. And today we're the #1 TV operating system in North America, powering more than a dozen TV manufacturers. Since then, we expanded into audio as well. And most recently, we have actually shifted into becoming a platform business. And what I mean by that is actually helping brands reach streamers and cord cutters through video advertising on the Roku platform, and helping content owners who have streaming services better monetize their audiences. And so the shift to streaming has absolutely accelerated, and it's a tremendous time to be in the streaming business more broadly.
Yeah, and there's so many different directions to go there. So maybe we can start with the advertiser side, since a lot of our audience are agencies and that sort of thing. So right now, for those that aren't familiar with it, what options are currently like on the table for an advertiser to get on Roku? Like what's the jumping off point? What's out there, I guess, at this point?
So I think to start, which is a question we sometimes get, where do the ads actually run on Roku? And for the most part, it is 15, 30-second, 60-second TV creatives that are running in ad-supported channels on Roku. However, the big difference is that, one, they're running one-to-one to the household that you want to reach. So in many ways, it's bringing the best of the precision and the attribution of digital advertising onto the largest screen in the home. The second thing is we actually go beyond the 30-second spot. We recently announced Roku Brand Studio, which is all about creating advertiser-driven storytelling built for TV streaming. And so the mission there is, how do we actually work with brands to help create short shows, shoulder content, extended streamer-first advertising that is built for a streaming environment? And we recently announced Roku Recommends, which is our first Roku Brand Studio production. It's a weekly 15-minute entertainment program that helps streamers solve a key problem, which is what to binge and what to watch next. We have thousands of channels. A lot of those streamers go right into ad-free environments. What Roku Recommends does is bring Maria Menounos and Andrew Hawkins, Emmy-winning host and an NFL star, together to help streamers figure out what are the best bets and the hidden gems. And we're using our own data to do that. So that's going to be the goal for the Roku Brand Studio. But to take a broader step beyond just kind of where do ads run and what are the opportunities, I think it's helpful to think about, what do advertisers face right now in TV advertising? And what we hear is a few things. The first is that the median age of the average broadcast TV viewer is above 60. And so most brands are looking for folks who are maybe 18 to 54. And the audience on traditional TV just isn't the same anymore. The second thing is that more folks than ever are cutting the cord and shifting to streaming. More than 1 in 3 homes in America no longer have pay TV. And at the same time, more than half of Roku users don't have a cable or pay TV subscription. So there's this whole audience base that you just can't find anymore on traditional TV. And then the third has been a decline in ratings. So over the last year, primetime ratings have declined about 20% in the key demos, but the price of TV advertising has gone up about 13%. So on the whole, brands are looking at this and they're saying, the ratings are going down, the audience is getting older, more people are cutting the cord and shifting to streaming, and I need to be able to find those folks to build my brand. And ideally, I want to do it in a world that takes all of the benefits of digital advertising, targeting, precision, lower ad loads, and brings it onto, again, the largest screen in the home. And that has really been where TV streaming fits into the broader media mix.
Yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity, and I know there's a lot of high levels of sophistication in terms of the targeting that you can do. So I'd like to get into that, but first, and not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, why do you, I'm just curious, like why do you think it's gotten more expensive to advertise in traditional TV? Like you think it would get cheaper maybe if there's fewer people there or whatever. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, just in terms of like these dynamics.
Well, I think there's two things. One is it's a supply demand equation. And when supply goes down, prices go up. And the second is it's a scarcity problem for the audiences you want to reach. So if you're a brand that really wants to reach 18 to 34-year-olds, the next generation of consumers, if you're a brand that knows that you have a very specific target, not a broad age, gender demo, but your ad or your product caters specifically to, dog owners, when you've got decreased supply, it becomes harder to find those folks. And so that's where the pricing is going up.
Yeah, yeah, and also your point about Roku Rex and everything. I love that because it feels like until you brought it up now, it seems like that was kind of a gap. Like I remember as a kid, there'd be the TV guide sitting on every countertop or whatever, and it seems like there's been more need than ever to have some sort of model for sifting through it, other than just like some listicle that you Google on a BuzzFeed or something. So that's pretty interesting, and it seems like since you're in more homes than any other platform, it seems like a natural play. Beyond that, though, I'd love to just kind of learn more about what that interaction is like. A lot of our audience are agencies, so I'd love to hear, how you're typically partnering with agencies and what sorts of targeting people can do, and basically what that whole relationship tends to play out, basically.
Where most agencies start with Roku is in looking at some of those market factors, knowing 9 and 10 of the Ad Age 200 brands are now advertising on the Roku platform. Most advertisers have streaming as part of their budget and media plan in some capacity now. And so where that conversation really starts is, how do I make the most of this shift to streaming? How do I do it smarter with better targeting and better measurement? And then I'd say the 201 conversation focuses on a few things. The first is, how do I go beyond that 30-second spot? And that's, again, where the Roku Brand Studio comes in to go beyond traditional TV advertising. And what we see from our streamers is that what they really appreciate is when brands can provide a value exchange. You can help me find the next show to watch. You could curate a free movie night. You can make this ad interactive so that I know where the dealer is, or I can get a coupon right to my phone. All of that sort of stuff actually brings value beyond just interrupting a show. The second way that I'd say agencies are really engaging has been around OneView, which is our ad buying platform built for streaming. And simply what OneView is a dashboard or a buying platform that allows you hands-on keyboard to buy ad inventory, not just that Roku sells, but across our platform, as well as on other TV streaming devices, Fire TV, Chromecast, et cetera, and on desktop and mobile. And we have a lot of, I'd say, buyers who want to have that hands-on keyboard. And to start with the largest TV streaming platform, to start with Roku's identity data, and to start with our performance measurement becomes a way to do that. And then I'd say the third key thing, which is something you asked about, Dan, is around targeting of ads. And we have advertisers that are bringing their own CRM data and their own targeting to Roku to make their advertising smarter, whether that's to reach their existing shopper and increase basket size, whether it's to go after their prospect list. It's all the things you can do in digital that you can now do on the TV screen. And it's super exciting to see that develop.
Yeah, and not to put you on the spot too much, but are there any interesting case studies or examples you're seeing of this, where people are like in creative ways, advertisers are tying these things together between a computer and a Roku and the whole landscape?
Yeah, it's actually where we see, I'd say, the leading advertisers going. And so we launched the Roku Measurement Partner Program to basically help advertisers tie, to your point, Dan, ad exposure to outcomes. There are more than about 20 measurement providers that are part of this program, and they can measure everything from Nielsen audience guarantees and age and gender to, did my ad change brand perceptions? Did it actually drive somebody into the store, visit a website, download a mobile app, or even purchase a product off the shelf. And most leading advertisers are now tying, did Dan see an ad and did that actually drive an exposure? A great example of this, to your question about, like, how is this actually playing out in the wild, is we launched a shopper data program around this with Kroger, which is the number one grocer in America, to actually tie loyalty card shopper data and grocery data to ad exposure. Johnsonville Sausage is a great example of this. They built a campaign on performance audiences to find new buyers and to drive sales on Roku. What they found was that Roku homes that were exposed to Johnsonville ads spent 16 times more on Johnsonville's new sausage strips than the average Kroger household. And so the point of all this is to say that's something you couldn't traditionally do in TV advertising. You couldn't say, I saw this 30-second ad and that actually moved the product off the shelf. That's now a reality. And to bring the number one TV streaming platform and the number one grocer in America together to do that is super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, to kind of shift gears a little bit to the audience side, and I've heard you talk about this elsewhere, where you're in a really interesting position where the demographics of your audience basically perfectly reflect the US and perhaps abroad at this point, because there's just so many of these devices in every home. So with that, there's so much to get into. I guess my first question is, are there any statistics or any data that have surprised you just about the way in which we're consuming media these days?
There's so much. I come from a research and measurement background, so I actually find this fascinating, and I'd say constantly coming across things that I just think like it's so cool to see the way consumers are changing. Two that I'd offer up is that first, free is the number one searched for term on Roku.com. And what I think is interesting about that for advertisers is there's a launch of a lot of subscription services, but ad-supported streaming services are the fastest growing category on our platform. And consumers still want movies and TV if that means they don't have to pay and an advertiser can help subsidize it. And it's been really interesting to see that there's actually room for a lot of different types of services and models in the shift to TV streaming. The second thing that's been interesting, particularly in the last year, has been the growth of fitness and home and DIY on our platform. As folks were spending more time at home, we saw the fitness category jump. Peloton, for instance, actually is a channel on our platform. And what's interesting about that is the smart TV is going beyond just movies and entertainment. It's also for workouts, and it's for meditation, and it's for, babysitting your kid and education and a whole bunch of other things. And so it's really wide in the aperture on what's possible. And the growth of both of those areas has been super interesting.
Yeah, and my guess is that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's probably a lot more there. And one thing with that in mind, it seems like there's this arms race for different content channels, whether that's a Netflix or an HBO or a Hulu or whatever. Is there anything you can you weigh in on that a little bit? Are there certain things that you're seeing that indicate that, okay, this channel's doing it better than that channel that you can talk about at this point? And where do you think that's going in terms of this content arms race?
What I think is most interesting about the growth of new streaming and launch of new streaming services has been that it actually expands the pie for TV streaming more broadly. Roku is a home for Peacock and HBO Max and Netflix and Hulu and so on. And a key part of our business is we actually help those services acquire new subscribers or viewers, help drive tune in when they have a premiere of a show, and help to retain and reduce churn for those users. And what I think is interesting is that there is a room for a variety of different services and business models in the shift to streaming. And we talked about ad-supported streaming, so free streaming channels. There's certainly been a growth in subscription video on demand services. There's also been a recent growth in what's called TVOD or transactional video on demand. These are movie and TV rentals. So if you think about things like Fandango or Prime Video, where you can rent a movie or a show. And the takeaway there being that Roku is actually very well positioned to help all of these services launch and grow their audiences, and two, there's room for a lot of different business models, which I think is exciting because it speaks to the replatforming of television more broadly.
Yeah, and that's super interesting. And I guess like where my head goes is does everything just kind of repeat itself? Like, do we have a situation where you keep paying more and more for various subscriptions and then pay as you go models, and then there's a huge demand for bundling, and then you have kind of a cable like system coming in, and then people want to rebel against that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, is there a way in which this heads towards some sort of bundling, or do you think that there's, structural reasons why that doesn't happen? So we got cut off for a second. So if this transition is clunky, that is why. I'm just going to come above board about it. But I think, basically we're talking about the potential for bundling, in these channels. And my question is sort of like, does history just sort of repeat itself where you have a bunch of disparate entities, and then there's there's an incentive to bundle them because people don't want to keep paying for more and more channels and all this sort of thing. So I just love to hear your thoughts on that. Do you think there's a reality in which this stuff all gets bundled, or do you think there's reasons that doesn't happen?
It's a good question. I think it was Andy Grove, who's the CEO of Intel, had a saying that, and I could be wrong, that might not actually have been him, but he had a saying that there's only two business models, bundling and unbundling. I don't know whether that's true or not, but what I think is interesting is that, less than does history repeat itself, it's how does the business models actually evolve to help the consumer. And what's exciting about this moment is there's really never been a better time to be somebody watching TV and movies. There's more shows, more services than ever before. And ultimately, the consumer wins out from that. So my crystal ball, I'd say, is as murky as anybody else's. But what will be exciting is to see that there's a variety of different services that can thrive here, whether they bundle or unbundle. And Roku, as America's #1 TV streaming platform, is uniquely positioned to help to cater to that future, no matter how it shakes out.
Yeah, and I really hope you're right. And not to go too negative, but I think we kind of saw like precisely the opposite happen with the cable space, and I guess continuing with big cable channels where you're stuck and you have horrible customer service and you're like locked into a contract and all these sort of things. And now what's disrupting that to a large extent is Roku and these platforms. So I just love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, do you think that how do you avoid that trap and continue to prioritize the consumer?
What we see in the research is that the #1 reason consumers actually choose Roku and what's made it the #1 TV streaming platform is ease and choice and convenience. And it's this idea that, when the Roku platform was designed, we called services channels and not apps. The remote is very straightforward and simple, and it says, okay, it doesn't say play or start or stream or something. And that's always been at the heart of our mission, which is how do we make TV as accessible, as convenient, and as choice-driven as possible. And I think the shift to streaming more than anything has actually enabled choice and convenience in a way that hasn't existed before. And it's going to be our focus as we continue going forward. I also think it's an exciting opportunity then for marketers because it opens up a new ways to reach your consumer and your audience. You don't necessarily, maybe to your point, Dan, have to rely on the way that cable or pay TV was structured. You can go beyond the 30-second ad. You can bring interactivity. You can write a show that comes on one click of the home screen from a Roku operating system. All of that hasn't existed before, and we see the trends moving forward in that direction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Dan, you mentioned one thing earlier about one of the most searched for terms being free. I guess I'm curious, like what else are people searching for? Like what else are you seeing demand for that isn't quite met yet?
Yeah, one thing that's interesting specifically in search is that we do see a spike in search trends around specific events. So when you look at things like the Super Bowl, the Grammys, the Oscars, the Olympics, the linear TV ratings for all of those big moments are declining, which is a real challenge, but opportunity for advertisers. And what we see is that when we have one of those moments, searches for the Oscar-nominated movies or the Olympic winning athletes or the Super Bowl starring, sports figures, all spike. And one thing that advertisers have recognized is these big moments are a way to catapult your brand, to create a platform that is bigger than what you might otherwise have in the normal day-to-day campaign. TurboTax is a great example of this, where they've long been a sponsor of March Madness. What they found, though, is that the ratings for March Madness are going down. And so if they wanted to continue to make the most of that moment, which is particularly important for TurboTax, it precedes, April tax filing and season, they needed to go beyond traditional TV. And so they not only just ran video ads on the Roku platform, but they also took advantage of the opportunity to, what we were talking about earlier, Dan, provide a value exchange to the streamer. So they created a where to watch guide, which allowed you to figure out how to stream the big games for March Madness. They helped to actually bring in branded original content focused on the game, in specific partnering with the Players Tribune. And they actually created a augmented reality experience off the Roku home screen that allowed you to scan a Snap AR code and then on your phone beat the buzzer where your TV turned into a March Madness hoop, and you could actually shoot the basketball from your phone onto your TV/basketball hoop. All of which is to say, it's an incredible creative canvas that just, again, hasn't existed in TV before. And to come back to your question about search, these moments are areas where brands can actually take advantage of what's happening in the culture, whether that's sports or awards or presidential debates, whatever it might be, and they can create something that's exciting and differentiated. And I think that's actually the most interesting part of where we see some of those spikes occurring and how brands are getting involved.
Yeah, it sounds like there's so many outlets for creativity and so on. And with that in mind, one thing that I have probably some nostalgia for, like a lot of us do, are just like the funny local ads, that you would get from traditional television and so on. And I'd love to learn about that. Like, what are the outlets for small, medium-sized businesses these days, or is that happening on Roku? Is that something that's going on in the future? I'd love to hear how that's going.
It absolutely is. One thing we shared recently was that the non-Ad Age 200 brands, so basically any brand that is smaller than the top 200, is growing faster on the Roku platform than the Ad Age 200, which is to say small and medium-sized businesses are actually breaking onto the TV screen in a way they haven't before. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is a lot of these local advertisers or D2C companies have grown up in a digital world, and to be able to take all of the buying, the targeting, the measurement, the attribution, the optimization into the TV screen makes it more accessible and familiar than it has in the past. The second is tools like OneView, the ad buying platform built for TV streaming, that allows a small business or a D2C company or a local direct response driven advertiser to actually manage and set up their campaign hands-on keyboard. And then I think the third interesting thing is being able to measure performance. We talked about Johnsonville Sausage earlier, but they're not the only ones who have the ability to say, did somebody see an ad? And then did they actually, sign up for a local gym? Or did they go to my e-commerce site? All of that is making the TV screen accessible in a way that it hasn't been for a lot of internet first and local first advertisers.
Yeah, and with that, and with the sort of tracking and attribution, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Apple Facebook beef and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure, to be honest, exactly what Apple has done in your competitor, I assume, with Apple TV. I don't know if they've blocked certain things yet there. But I guess I'd just love to hear your thoughts. Like, how do you see that affecting your world, if at all? Like, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, so what we've seen, obviously, in the news is that Google has deprecated third-party cookie support on browsers, and Apple has put in ATT, or limited ad tracking capabilities, on iOS. The way that affects Roku, the short answer is it actually doesn't affect us materially, because we are not a browser-based platform and we're not an iOS-based platform. We have our own identifier called the RITA, or the Roku ID for advertisers. And it actually comes back to your last question, Dan, which is that a lot of D2C and smaller advertisers are turning to TV streaming because we don't have some of the challenges that now exist in the cookie world and in the iOS world. It's an opportunity to have that same, again, digital quality targeting and measurement in a world that's not impacted by some of these changes.
Right. Makes sense. And do you see any, regardless of, the current layout and the infrastructure of these things, do you see a cultural shift happening? If people get used to blocking apps on their Apple devices, do you think that's going to move into your world and other worlds, or I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sorry, when you say blocking apps, do you mean limiting ad tracking?
Right. Just culturally, do you think there's going to be a bigger push for that, based on the experience people might be having between Apple or Google and other interfaces? Do you think that's going to be a demand that a Roku is going to need to meet, or do you think it plays out a different way?
It's a good question. I mean, what I can say is that one thing we talked about earlier was this idea of the value exchange, and the fact that what we've seen in TV streaming is folks say, if I'm actually able to get a value exchange, if I can watch a movie or a show with fewer ads and I don't have to pay for it, and it's easy to find, that actually is a fair value exchange for me as a consumer. One thing we haven't talked about yet is the Roku channel, which is our owned and operated channel on the Roku platform. And it is basically the home for free movies and television. It was born out of that insight we were talking about earlier, that free was the number one searched for term on Roku.com. And it started first with us licensing movies and television shows that we made for free. And then it expanded into live television. So we actually created a TV guide-like experience where you could tune in and watch things as they were being streamed live. We've expanded to Spanish language, and then expanded to kids and family. And we expanded to premium subscriptions. So you actually had one place where you could sign up for subscription services like Stars or Acorn or so forth, all in one place. And then most recently, we announced Roku Originals, which was born on our acquisition of the Quibi library. And that is all about creating free original content, one click from the home screen, no sign up or strings attached, to delight our users and to provide another option of something to watch. I mentioned all of that, coming back to your question about how are consumers maybe going to react to some of the changes in the landscape, which is to say that we see streamers valuing free and valuing the value exchange more than they ever have before. And that's been one of the reasons why the Roku channel is one of the most successful ad-supported services on Roku.
Yeah, it makes sense. And and hopefully this isn't a pejorative, but it almost feels like it's sliding into the place of, broadcast television, which is just completely free. You just turn it on and see what's going on as opposed to cable or something. So at least that's a oversimplification and a good way to slot it in. So Dan, kind of getting towards the end of the time, I'd love to just hear what's on the horizon, like what's keeping you busy. What are you working on these days?
Well, we're definitely busy with all the things we've talked about. But what I would say is, our founder and CEO, Anthony Woods, says that he often says there's, never been a better time to be in the TV streaming business. And I think that that's absolutely the case. It has never been moving faster. There's never been more opportunity for advertisers. And there's never been a bigger shift for consumers in the replatforming of the TV device. And that's what gets me most excited. I've been at Roku coming on 5 years, and I'm more excited, I think, now than I ever have been, because there is a creative canvas for brands to do a lot of the things that they've wanted to do on the television screen. And it's a CMO level priority in a way that it maybe hasn't been before. And we're really starting to see that shift. And our focus going forward is going to be making sure we maintain ease and choice and convenience in everything that we do.
Awesome. Yeah, really excited to see how it all progresses. So Dan, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dan.